Hey everybody, thanks for joining me here and thanks for checking out my podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the notification bell for new episodes. You can also find Shine Without Shame on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And I'm curious, what would be a medically inaccurate piece of information that's in curriculum?
Oh, well, in a lot of the abstinence only, they were said, don't even use condoms because they don't prevent pregnancy and they don't prevent STIs.
I see.
Abstinence is the only thing. So people just kept scaring people, and kids then wouldn't use it.
Right. And that is so interesting that, the audience who listens to this podcast is varied. I mean, some are religious, some are not, some have more conservative values, some don't. So I'm certainly not here to focus on one particular perspective, but now that you're saying this about the conservative curriculum, I'm curious. I'm just thinking out loud, real time here. For a family or an individual or a community that is religiously focused, that maybe does have a belief or teaching that sex is meant for marriage.
Yes.
What I hear you saying is that there still is education that's needed that isn't saying go have sex. It's about promoting and educating young people and just people in general, I think, about the body, the natural stages of development and curiosity and the development of the body and our connection to it and our understanding of why there are changes and how we relate to, the physical, biological changes. So if that's what I understand, also what you're saying, this is about, like you said, the European system, life education. And
yes.
I understand that, yes, fear is used as a tactic to, in some communities or some, parts of the country, fear is used as a tactic to prevent people. If the belief is don't have sex before you're married, then all kinds of fear is used to try to put those obstacles on the path, as opposed to, it's like I'm curious, you could still promote that belief or that idea, but
definitely.
but not dismiss or deny the natural human, development and evolution. It's just, that's a real-time thought. I hadn't thought about it out loud. So thank you for bringing that to my mind.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is really important. This idea that if we give them education, it somehow means that they're going to do it. Actually, the research, we have so much research, you wouldn't even believe it. We have so much that it's embarrassing that we do what we do in our country, because we have so much research to show what is actually protective of children, right? When you provide them with the education, kids actually get involved with sex later, make safer sexual choices, are able to see what exploitation is happening around them and make decisions to keep themselves safe, choose better relationships once they do choose relationships. So they often have better memories, less assault, right? And they end up thriving more as they get older, right? Because they've delayed it. I worked with many students who came from religious backgrounds. I had a small handful of people whose parents actually did it really, really well, right? They gave them all the life education. They gave them all the sex education. And they said, here's why I would hope for you to wait. Well, the kind of relationship you're going to have at 16 will be important in your development, but it is not going to be the best relationship of your life because people aren't developed enough yet, right? And so if it's a relationship with someone, they might be more self-absorbed than they might be 10 years later. And so it may not be as good of a relationship. So what I want for you is to have a relationship where you are seen, known, loved, accepted, where you feel like you can grow and thrive inside that person's care for you. And they can too. And this actually takes some development. So I don't want you to have your hopes up too high, even though you're going to have big feelings. Just understand you're still developing, right? And then also made it safe. If you make a mistake, come tell me, And together we can help you turn that mistake into a lesson so that you keep growing and evolving, right? There are all kinds of ways that actually we know help kids to delay sexual involvement, to set their standards higher so that they actually give themselves time to develop and other people time to develop, so that when they start having relationships, they're just better relationships. Now, 80% of kids who are 20 are going to be sexually active in some way, shape, or form. And we're not marrying until 28 to 30, right? So there may be a period of time that your child is sexually active, but you want to focus on what's the quality of relationships that they are allowing themselves to have. And are those relationships holding an appropriate place in their life in the midst of all their other desires and goals and plans, that kind of thing, right? And this actually comes with very mature thinking. So you have to have been having conversations all along the way. Yeah, I talk about in the book, in the Shameless book, probably in the 10 to 12-year-old area. I'm trying to remember exactly where it is, but a book that I love parents to read called Not Under My Roof. And it's a book written by a Dutch scholar who came to the United States. And she started to notice how adolescents were with their parents around dating and sexuality. Like they would pull away and they didn't talk to them. Everything was a secret. And she goes, it is so not like that in Holland. So she did a qualitative research study. She picked 2 cities in Holland, 2 cities in the United States, studied those families, interviewed those kids, and then put it together in this book. And you can see what is different in a culture that has comprehensive, age-appropriate sex education woven through their daily conversations at home. That kids actually will get to a point, they're like, so I like this person, but I don't know if I'm ready to be more sexually intimate. Can you help me figure that out? That's the question that they bring to their parents.
Wow.
Right? Yeah. And so if you want to see what it looks like, because this is true for Holland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Iceland, all of those countries, because they've been doing this for years and years and years, read that book, because it's stunning for Americans to read that book.
That is amazing. Just to hear that perspective and that cultural difference, and to know that there are useful and beneficial approaches to the education that help families probably become more unified and, to create healthier dynamics with parents and children. And that's encouraging.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
really
I'd love to tell a story. I had a student one time who had come from very religious Christian background. And her mom there were 4 girls. And so she would say, if I wanted extra time with my mom, I would tell her I had a question, and she'd come sit by my bed at night, and we would talk and talk and talk. And she's like, I learned that I could keep coming up with questions and my mom would always give me time. And so she just got this great education, relationship, life, sexual education as she grew up. She said, when I got to college, I was so uninterested in boys. She was straight. She was so uninterested because in high school, they'd been stupid. I just wasn't sure if they were still stupid. And she goes, about my sophomore year, I ended up meeting what became my future husband. And together we started talking about, as we got into our relationship, how much intimacy we wanted to share. And if there was any that we wanted to keep until after we were married, even though we'd grown up with being told what to do. And so we decided to put intercourse on the shelf, not because it was a religious thing that we were told, but because we knew, being straight, that it was the organizing principle in a straight relationship. And we wanted to develop a kind of intimacy that had so many other ways to say, I love you, that were private and public, right? And so we developed this really rich way of loving each other for 2 years before we married. And then when we got married, we took intercourse off the shelf. Now, with 2 small children, I can tell you that was the best decision of our lives. So people say, can you make abstinence, or can you make waiting to have intercourse or waiting to do anything? Of course you can, but it's got to be your decision and it's got to make sense to you. And I loved that story because that's exactly what they did. And it really benefited their relationship.
Oh, So many things to think about. And, it's important that we as a society evolve in a culture in our, we all, ideally, I think, even if we have different, slightly different, cultural values or interests, I mean, we need to get on the same page about how to move forward and really create, like, the words you keep using are, thriving and healthy. And I mean, that's just, that's something I think everyone wants for their kids, for their families, and for society. And can I ask you about my questions about pornography? Because you had mentioned a statistic about, even in I guess in this, well, you didn't say southern states, excuse me, but in the more conservative states, that there is data on how, you said teenage pregnancy is higher where there's abstinence, really in hardcore abstinence, sex education, and that the pornography data usage is higher there, if I understood you correctly. And this is something that I've been hearing more about. It's interesting with the advent of, podcasts and YouTube videos. There's just, for better or for worse, there's a lot more information, a lot more conversations. I think for the most part, for the better, at least the ones that hit my feed. I'm interested in what is being discussed. But I have been curious about and I'm sure it's not, I understand that, pornography, or whether it was consumed in, paper format or video format, it's not something that's new to our culture. But the idea of addiction to pornography is something that people are talking about more, therapists and just commentators, people who are interested in the topic. And I'm curious on your take, because I understand that it's not necessarily about actually a sexual perversion when people are addicted to pornography. At least that's what I've heard some researchers talk about, that there's now an understanding that it's actually even more about emotional coping, that people are that's why they're using pornography. Now, I don't know how you feel about that. That was something I heard someone speak about. And I was just curious, in the context of healthy relationships, healthy sexual relationships, people's future relationships, and how pornography and the consumption of that is affecting or could affect someone's healthy dynamics in an intimate relationship, in marriage. This is interesting, but I'm also curious if you see it as a sexual, when it's considered kind of an addiction to pornography. Is that, in your mind and your experience and understanding this research, is that something that is considered sexually perversive, or is that really more about someone's need to kind of deal with their emotions and maybe even some of their shame in a way where they're using pornography that way? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. So first, let me say that as somebody who's done a lot of training and is certified as a sex therapist and sex therapy supervisor, in the world of people who actually have studied sexuality and human sexuality, we don't believe in sex addiction. We believe in there's obsession or a compulsion around their use. But the field of sex addiction therapy is one person's idea, and it's not based in research. And in that idea, your partner can tell a therapist they think you're addicted, and the therapist believes it. Okay. Now, that's too simplistic. Now, we don't know if the person feels like it's an obsession or a compulsion. We don't know if it's interfering with their work or their lives or whatever. It may be interfering with their relationship, but that's a relationship issue that we need to look at. So this is a much more complex issue than gets talked about by most untrained people. And there's a lot of untrained people out there, including John Gottman, who are talking about pornography. I mean, well-known people, but they are not trained in human sexuality. And that's because you don't get it when you go to grad school, medical school, You don't get it when you go to therapy school. You don't get it. You have to go do specialized training. This is how awful we are, I think, as a country. We have to go do specialized training if you want to understand human sexuality in all of its complexity. So now your question, do people use pornography as a way to cope with emotional pain? Many people do. Not all people who use pornography do, but many people do, just like they use alcohol, or just like they use their work, or just like they work. We don't call somebody addicted to work when they're working all the time to deal with their emotional pain. This is the same thing, okay? People are using, sure, there are people that, because look at what the body system can do. It can move yourself through an arousal cycle. It can give you an orgasm or an ejaculation. You then get a huge download of prolactin, oxytocin, serotonin, other kinds of chemicals that your brain produces that then take your hyped sense of anxiety and calm you right down. It's a real system, right? It really works, men and women. It really works to calm you down. So yeah, but does alcohol have a way to sort of calm you down? Yes. Do other kinds of drugs? Yes. Do going to work and getting in your zone? Yes. Okay, dopamine, tons of dopamine, right? So, but we don't call all of those things addiction. But if it is interfering with someone's ability to do their life, then we would have a conversation about, what does sexual health look like? And how do we help you move into a place where you're living out sexual health in a way that isn't affecting your job in a way you don't want it to, or your relationships in a way that you don't want it to, or your life in a way that you don't want to? And so we actually help them see what their triggers are to escape, deal with those, and then put together a sexual health plan that actually fits for them, and then how to move into that. So that's what the therapy looks like. It's also important to talk about the difference between free pornography and ethically produced pornography. Free pornography often is trafficking 18-year-old girls, taking them down to Miami, right? Are not required to use prophylactics in pornography filming in Miami or down in Florida. And it's very dangerous. And they are burning these young women out in 3 months, right? And then just throwing them to the side. That's free pornography. Now, you can pay for pornography where the people are saying, this is my choice. I want to choose the scenes. There's food on set. There's prophylactics on set. I'm kept safe. This is my choice. And they are a part of things, and they're paid a fair wage, right? But you're going to have to pay for that. That is not an exploitive kind of entertainment, adult entertainment, where free pornography is largely exploitive. And if that's important to you to not exploit people, then I would say be responsible in how you purchase your sex work, your pornography or whatever, right? Some people use pornography, and I would say hopefully ethical pornography, to try to understand a little bit more about sexuality. I don't think it's the best way to do it, because it's still entertainment, right? Like, we know when we watch Spider-Man that we're not going to go scale a building because Spider-Man can do it, because that's entertainment. Or we're not going to drive like Fast and Furious because we know we'll get ourselves killed, right? We know the difference between entertainment. But when it comes to pornography, because we fail to provide accurate sex education, people are often turning to pornography to give them sex education, which does not translate, especially in the heterosexual world, it does not translate to making people good lovers, right? Lots of men who are watching straight free pornography think that being violent or rough is what women want. We know that there is an increase, research-wise, there's an increase in rough sex in the straight world. That's coming from pornography, because they're not getting anything that says, you don't know what someone wants until you talk to them and ask them. And they have to feel safe enough to tell you what they like and don't like, right? So the whole thing of pornography is a much bigger issue. So you can see where, when it's really underground and it is bad to talk about sex in any way, people go to the underground to get their learning and their experiences. but then there's so much they're not getting. Like, they don't know when they're being exploitive, or they don't know when they're being exploited. They're not able to read situations well, all kinds of things that can create problems for people. Yeah.
Thank you for giving that perspective. Yes, I'm there's still more I want to think about on this topic, because I'm and obviously I'm not the expert, but I do, from what I hear, and in terms of how people use, some people and some men in particular use, and I think it's maybe a majority of men, but I don't know the data on the usage, but how men are using pornography. And I guess, yes, in the context of heterosexuality, it's their usage is quite high. I mean, I don't know, again, I don't have the data, but from the way people just anecdotally talk about this in conversations, that there's the kind of usage and consumption is so high that whether it's addiction or compulsion or something, it just seems, I'm not here to label, it doesn't have to be an addiction, but it just seems that is going to create many challenges. The context that you talked about in terms of, exploring sex and sexuality through pornography, I think is certainly, I imagine that is real, but is the way some people utilize it. But I think there's at least the way it's couched, there's this growing concern that it's consumed in a way that young men especially are not going on dates. And I know there is some information on this. I don't know the data, that they're younger men, at least in the US, are struggling now to speak to women, to go up to them, approach them, to ask them out on dates. And again, this is anecdotal. This is the way people are talking about this subject. And so they're turning to pornography, and they're utilizing pornography as their way to have their sexual release. And so that's how I'm hearing the information when I listen to people talk about it. Now, you may disagree or say that that's not how it's probably, that's not the accurately like the psychology or the emotional side of things. But I think it's just something I want to kind of understand more of. And if you have any good resources, I would be happy to hear about those, because I think I really care about how is this affecting relationships, intimate, romantic relationships now, and how is it affecting for people who are, down the road in their lives, the way that they, like you were talking about, teaching young people how to be mature about their, how they choose partners and how they decide to engage in relationships. To me, that principle applies to people who are utilizing pornography or consuming it, more than just like every once in a while, like when it's a regular activity in their life. And this is not said with judgment. I'm curious. And I'm wondering, what are the potential ramifications? And I don't know what you know about the statistics and the data on young men right now in America who are struggling with, again, just being comfortable with speaking to women, having relationships, the options of, the option of online dating is positive for some people, but for some, it seems like it's taking away from potentially creating like healthy or just long-lasting relationships with this sense that there's just a lot of options and you can just kind of keep exploring options. So again, I know I'm putting a lot out there, and I'm saying all this to say I'm curious, and I care about people and their, like you do, and their happiness and thriving in every aspect of life. So, and it may be just a bigger conversation, a bigger topic to explore, but that's why I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And you're bringing up, I think, some really important points, but I want to be careful to not pin it on pornography. And so, yes, there's a high proportion of men in particular who will use pornography. And one of the things that's important to understand the difference of is drive, sexual drive, that feeling like I feel keyed up, I want to have a release, I want to move through my arousal cycle, and desire for connection and pleasure. Okay. We come out of the womb, we're seeking the breast, even though the milk's not there. It's our innate desire for connection and pleasure. We know if we don't give 2-year-olds enough touch, right, they will suffer neurological damage. Walk down the halls of an Alzheimer's unit. People don't have to have memory, but they are still seeking connection and pleasure. This is hard rooted inside of us, right? Pornography is never going to give you connection. It is going to give you pleasure. Now, it's probably not fair to say never, because now we have
OnlyFans
and VC, where you can interact with somebody. So there is some interaction that's happening. But for the most part, that's just going to help you move through your arousal cycle quickly if you're visually oriented, right? That's going to serve a purpose for you. I think it's important to have the conversation about, if we are noticing that people are not moving forward to have relationships, then what's going on? Because they are still in their heart lonely. Mm-hmm. They're still in their heart wanting to connect. But have we failed our kids by allowing them to sit on video games when they're not in school, as opposed to say, you're going out and you're going to be on a team, or you're going to be with a group, or you're going to go be social? Because there are skills to have in being social. You're going to learn to use your words. You're going to use to not just get angry. You're going to learn all the things. So when I talk about sex education as being relationship education, we actually have kids that are going to school, studying in their classes, coming home, and they're on video games the rest of the night, do homework, go to bed. They are having no social involvement. We just went through a pandemic. We have 3 years of kids that were on, this and trying to create relationships. That's not how adolescents create relationships, right? And so all that learning that they need to do by being in the social arena, they're not doing. And then we wonder why they don't want to go out in this scary thing called dating with this other creature, whether they're straight or not. Like, you're different from me. Are you going to reject me? Right? Core fear. Are you going to reject me? Kids need social involvement. They need playing sports. They need horseback riding. We need a hiking group. They need something that's going to keep them interacting with other people to learn the skills of relationship. I don't care if you are brilliant and you are a genius in a particular thing and you're going to go on to have a career and make a buku's dollars. You will not be happy until you have emotional intelligence and you know how to do relationships well, conflict well, hold on to yourself in the face of somebody else disagreeing with you or thinking badly of you, whatever. These are skills that we have to teach our children. So it is not porn's problem any more than it's money's problem that people are struggling. It's that we have been failing to give our children emotional intelligence or to value that as a culture. And again, I harken back to my story about making capitalism more important than anything else. This is part of what we are now seeing. When we make careers more important than people, when we make making money more important than people, we start to see people who can't do relationships, right? So it's a bigger thing. And that's why I think we have to look at it from that bigger window.
Certainly. I agree with you. I agree that pornography is not the root of the issue. It's such a hot topic. I wanted to put it out there to talk about, shine some light on it. But I so appreciate you putting it into the bigger picture of helping our children to learn to be emotionally, open and available, and to learn how to create connection.
Right.
And that truly, I think, is at the heart of our problems. And it's the challenge that lies in front of all of us.
Absolutely.
Whether we have children or, we work with kids, or we in our community, who we're supporting, whatever the context is for every person.
Right. Well, and I will say one of the things that is really concerning around pornography is the exposure that children have right? The average age that a child is seeing online pornography is age 9, right? We have no internet protections in place to really protect our kids. And I mean, at the federal level, we need so much more help, with that kind of thing. When you have a developing brain that sees something it can't make sense of and it scares them or whatever, it will imprint, right? You can sexually traumatize a child by having them see something that their brain can't make sense of. And they already know, I can't talk about this. They know that because they've been getting in trouble since before they could speak, right? And so they don't tell anyone. So it goes into a secret vault inside of them. That becomes a problem, right? So there are areas of culture where we have to be protective of kids. And I talk about in the book, here's how you start talking about pornography. Here's how you start talking about things that could appear on the screen and blah, blah, blah. How you do that starting at age 8, right? These are ways that you start talking about things so that your child knows that if it sees something, they can come see you. They can talk to you about it. You can explain it. You can give it context, which, diminishes the chance that it'll be a trauma response from what happened, right? We're having to do this around a lot of things. The 9-year-old girl that's walking down the street and she gets whistled at or approached or something, right? All of a sudden, her body, she realizes, is something that can be scary to her, that somebody responds as if it's an object, right? She doesn't know. You've got to start talking about these things. It's like, honey, in our home, things are safe. But I need to let you know there are some things out there, and I don't want to scare you, but I just want you to be aware. And if something like that happens, let's come talk about it, right? Because not everything in the world is as safe as it is here at home. So there are ways that you start preparing your child. So when things happen, they're like, oh yeah, mom, dad, somebody told me about that. I can go talk to them about that and they'll tell me more. They'll help me understand it better. So I've got lots of resources in these books to help parents know how to navigate all of this stuff.
So valuable. And again, I can't help but point out that you are continuously talking about communication and, within families, parents and children, that is where it all starts. Education, communication, and modeling, as the parents,
Yes.
modeling in the sense of being willing to be open, and be vulnerable, and to also say, I don't know, but let's explore this together. Let's find out together. And wow, how different life can be when you have those sort of parents or guardians in your life, who aren't perfect and who don't have all the answers, but who create the space where there is the opportunity to feel safe, to explore, to be vulnerable. And I so appreciate that is part of what you're promoting, a big part of what you're promoting and what you're helping people to understand. And I just want to give you an opportunity before we bring this to a close to offer any final thoughts, words, encouragement, anything that you want people, parents, individuals, young people to think about, to consider, and to know about for their journey, and hopefully on their way to being healthy, happy, thriving humans.
Yeah. I'm a real believer that we can only love as deeply as we have learned to love ourselves. We can only live as shamelessly as we've learned to heal our own shame, or help others live shamelessly as we've learned to heal our own shame. So I say to people, make yourself and your own healing a priority, whatever that takes. There's wonderful books out there. There are podcasts, there are therapists, there are all kinds of opportunities out there to heal. But as you heal your own heart and your own shame, you'll be able to love so much more fully, and you'll be able to hold people with compassion and empathy so much more, because you hold yourself with more compassion and empathy. So do that work, because you are worth it and your life is worth it. But also everyone else you love is worth it too. And you'll be able to love so much more fully because you've learned to love yourself. So that's kind of understand that we can't take somebody somewhere if we haven't learned to go there ourselves. We can't love them with joy and thriving if we haven't learned to love ourselves with joy and thriving. So it's an important job. And I think in the last 2 generations, there's been a lot of priorities, I think, in our socio-political life that have made people's thriving actually less valuable. We've spent less time investing in that. And I would say you are worth investing in. And so do it, please, because you deserve it. You deserve to love fully and be loved fully.
Such loving, encouraging, eloquent words. Thank you, Dr.
You're
Sellers.
welcome.
I'm going to ask you the question I ask every guest at the end. Which television show, it could be new, it could be old, do you recommend? Doesn't have to be your favorite, but why do you recommend it? And what is it?
I'm not a huge TV watcher, but a few years ago, before I left my academic position, I think it was one of my last years there, I had a student that came up to me and said, Tina, have you heard of this new TV show called Sex Education? It's British. And I said, no, not yet. And they're like, oh my gosh, you're going to love it. So I went home, watched it, and I fell in love because I loved the premise. And the premise was high school kids. This one kid's mom is a sex therapist. And so he's grown up learning about all the true things that are about sexuality. And then he, as a good friend at high school, and then everybody was coming to her about their problems, right? Because they didn't have any sex education. And so they were like, you know, how come it's not working? My girlfriend doesn't like to have her hair pulled, and I don't understand it because women are supposed to like their hair pulled. I don't know, whatever, right? And so the two of them get together and they start like a sex clinic, a sex education clinic. And so students come and they bring their problems. And so the two of them give the information. One collects the money. And anyway, so they do this. But what I love about the show is the audience, the people who are watching the show, they actually get sex education because it's put up against the myth that was presented by the student and then the truth. And the premise is so delightful. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is actually a show that's providing sex education to the United States or to Britain or whatever. And I just loved it. So there's 3 seasons. I think the first 2 are probably the best, but I loved the premise. It just made me hopeful for what media maybe could do to help us, you know, as opposed to not.
That's great. I've seen a couple of like clips or trailers over the years of that. I haven't sat down and watched it, but I appreciate that. I'll add that to my list. And
yeah.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Sellers, for being here, for sharing your experience and your insights, and for doing it so eloquently, and for keeping a holistic mindset and approach to your work and how you speak about these topics. And you've given me some things to think about. I always appreciate all of my guests, of course, because everyone brings something authentic and unique, but I appreciate especially people who have an expertise, because then it helps me think a little bit more clearly about certain aspects of shame and of growth and healing. And then I can do a little bit more of a deep dive on my own, which I love doing. So thank you for being here and for sharing.
Yes, thank you so much. It was a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate having this with you in this time. So thanks again.